Welcome to Lead with Tech. Today we have a very special episode about the digital transformation in logistics. And John, lead the way. What are we talking about today?
Well, thanks very much for that introduction, Alex. I find that the logistics industry today is at a crossroads. Systems that are outdated and inefficient are quickly becoming major barriers to success. But the real question that I'm trying to ask here is whether companies are prepared to take that step forward with new tech and lead the way into the future. Company that I wanted to talk today about is Hub Group. They've actually just done a new acquisition with EASO, as they are implementing a cross-border service as well down into Mexico. So they're actually broadening their footprint as well, which is good to know, and it shows signs of growth. They service, multiple industries such as e-commerce, FMCG, construction, healthcare. So they really are quite a large-scale company that's been established for, 50 years plus.
I glanced at the numbers for the previous 3 years, and it looks like even though it's in billions, they are not growing. Why is that?
There's two major contributing factors to the reason for that loss of revenue. And the first one is obviously the post-pandemic decline in the entire industry, but particularly the supply chain and logistics industry were hit the hardest. And I believe in the terminology in the industry is known as the reverse bullwhip effect. So that's one of them. And then there's a major disruption in global supply chains across the world, not only during COVID, but even in the months and short years after the pandemic itself.
So, but this podcast is about technology, right? And obviously we can't do much about the post-COVID results and all that stuff. We can't do much about the hardware infrastructure issues. What do you think we as a technology company with our expertise, what part of this journey that they are on right now is taken by the technology, and what are they doing wrong, and what can they do right to, get back on track with the revenue? Is it even possible to use technology to digitally transform and with that transform the business once again and be on the path to grow?
Mm-hmm. Those are good questions. And it was going to form part of what I was going to say. And actually the second part of that is the second contributing factor to why logistic companies are falling behind now is the lack of the new tech adoption. To back that up, for instance, only 50% of logistics professionals utilize basic data analytics in their operations. So that's an astronomical number. If you can think about how many people are involved in the industry and operations, if they're only using basic data analytics solutions, I'm sure there's a lot of data that's being lost or misconstrued along the way.
Yeah, it's probably very similar to the utilities industry as well, because what I heard from other people about the logistics industry, what we know about it is that they grow through acquisitions most of the time, but at the same time, the brokers who are in the middle, right, between the shippers and truck drivers, they are forced to work in very hostile environment, should I say, right? Having to make, hundreds of cold calls a day, not really being very involved in all those conversations, not really being there to build connections and relationships with the customers, but just to hit the numbers. And obviously the burnout rate is very high. The level of adoption of new technologies is very low because the company needs to grow. Acquiring a company, for example, the integration itself just takes, months, even years sometimes. And at the same time, you need to make sure that you grow in your main avenue. So that number of 50% is no surprise, but it is staggering. 50% of them are not using even basic data analytics, which obviously in this case could make the company so much more efficient, even with basic AI tools that we typically work with, right? Like we work with much more sophisticated stuff, but even on a basic level, you can already see how much value AI and basic data analytics could bring into this industry as a whole. Obviously, we probably don't know much about this company's utility of AI and technology. Maybe they're the exception, hence the billions of dollars. But just the fact that they're losing money based on those reports tells us that if technology is part of that, or it's partially the reason, then it's already worth exploring for that company to see what they can do.
100%. Just to give you another random stat or two random stats that came from the same survey, 66% of logistics professionals in Germany alone do not even have defined sustainability goals or metrics. And further to that, only 25% of these respondents to the survey make use of AI technologies. And we don't even know if those are technologies that are, very niche or designed specifically for a purpose within the business or the industry. I mean, it could be any form of AI technology, but it's only 25%. So for me, that's astounding.
Well, let me put it this way. If we're talking about digital transformation, it doesn't really matter today if we're talking about logistics, utilities, you name it, like any industry outside of tech. It's always going to be the same thing. You have to be mobile first, right? You have to make sure that your big data becomes analytical and that you have access to that information at an instant, which today's AI technologies can provide. Obviously not the out-of-the-box ones, but custom-made that will work for your benefit. If you have that data, if you're mobile first, if you understand what your people are dealing with, and for example, in logistics, we know the turnover is very high. People can't really find life-work balance. So obviously they move to other industries. But if you want to fix that, that's what digital transformation needs to focus on in the first place. And for me, the digital transformation with any non-tech company always starts with optimizing your data, optimizing the interfaces of like how people interface with your work, and optimizing the people's processes, what they have that is inefficient today that could be more efficient later. For example, in logistics, we know that if you're making 100 calls a day, you have to be following up with those people later, either by email or phone. And that thing alone is already a great subject matter for any automation that we're talking about today, because those follow-ups are pretty standard typically, and they just need to be done. But they take away from the time, from the quality time that the people could actually spend on building relationships with their customers, something that you actually need to grow a company. And it is a very loud bell that's ringing when you're losing 1 billion or even more. Again, the question is, what percentage of that loss is due to your inability to analyze data correctly? What percentage of that is your people not being efficient at their work because they have to either do repetitive tasks or have to make a lot of calls a day that just gets them burned out? So those questions are important, and I believe that a certain percentage of that number is related to these issues. And if it's even 20%, it's already $200 million we're talking about. Like, who wouldn't want to say that?
Exactly.
Invest in technology, invest in AI, lead with tech, right? That's the name of the podcast. That's exactly why. Because if you invest in tech, if you do that, that will be your first step towards digital transformation as a logistics company.
No, I completely agree. I mean, when you're talking about user interface and user experience, whether it's on the employee side or on the customer facing side, those experiences and usability features and feelings that you get when dealing with a company like this, it's absolutely paramount, because it's reputation on the line, it's service delivery, it's technological usability. And that also bleeds into what you were saying about the turnover of staff, workload and stress. Employees won't be happy to come back to work if there's high stress, high workloads due to operational or technological inefficiencies. I think that's the first port of call when you're thinking about digital transformation, and then bleed out into the other areas like fleet management or supply chain management, warehousing management. But I think it all starts with, first and foremost, your customers, and then second to that, obviously your employees. So I think it's a very
customers,
good and valid point that
employees,
you
and
made.
data. Like those three, they have to be in a perfect triangle. And one other thing to consider is we had this example in the utility sector with account managers who've been working with, we're talking about not residential, but commercial utilities. When they had relationships with those customers for like 10 years, 15 years, and then they have to leave, or they get burned out as well, and they leave the company. It's not just them leaving the company, it's all those relationships, all that data that's in their minds, right, in their head, they're leaving with them. So in order for you to prevent that, you have to own your data. And if you're, as a logistics company, if you're, obviously you rely on those brokers and those people who are, well, on the phone all the time. If you want to stop the leak in the first place, you have to make sure that the data is yours, and not just yours on the server somewhere that only like a few gifted people can access, right? Some engineers.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that the data that you have is accessible to all the key stakeholders of the company at any moment using natural language. Again, we're talking about AI AI that analyzes your data in real time all the time. It's proactive. It's not even reactive. You don't have to ask it anything. It has to know what is important to you, and it has to feed that back to you every day at any moment, saying, hey, this team is less efficient than that one. That team is making those calls, but those guys, are more efficient because they're using those scripts instead of those scripts. So let's maybe adopt those scripts to other teams. Just stuff like that. A lot of those things that used to be the domain and ownership of a particular person, individual in your company, now becomes shared across the company. And even if they leave, the trace of their work and all those scripts, all their calls that AI can listen to and analyze, right? All that data stays in the company. And now whoever comes after the person who leaves will be able to be caught up very quickly, trained, coached by AI. And then you will have this solid, very well-oiled machine that works no matter what happens. Then you're safe.
Talk about having your finger on the pulse. I think that's perhaps a good analogy for that. That's phenomenal. I mean, if you can encapsulate all that data, but in an easy to absorb format for, let's say new employees or whatever the case may be, I think that is paramount, and it will just save that whole integration process that normally would take months or, up to a year. It can dramatically reduce that time wastage.